Paper or plastic? A piece of 8 from the Nod Wells timelines. Kevin Chamberlain wasn't a happy man by nature. That said, he wasn't particularly unhappy or miserable either. In a lot of ways, he simply was, going about his business, and making his way through life in whatever way seemed appropriate to him in any given moment. By any objective measure, he was a successful man, having held a series of increasingly prestigious and higher-paying office jobs throughout his career, which currently saw him overseeing the restructuring of a recently acquired, former competitor of his current employer.
It's time for the Post-Mortem Report, with your hosts Ronald McGilwray and Michael Schotter. Each month, these sultans of speculative fiction take a break from bending reality to ask one burning question. What cool stuff got buried in the social media graveyard while people were busy yelling at each other? Well, there's only one way to find out, so let's dig into it. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Post-Mortem Report. I'm your co-host, Michael Schotter.
And I'm Ronald McGilwray. Welcome to episode 30. Happy New Year.
The big 3-0, as it were. As usual, we have many new and exciting things to talk to you all about. But before we get into all of that, how have you been, good sir?
I have been just fine. Thank you for asking. But you know what today is?
What's that?
Today is the Mike Tyson fight.
Oh, yeah. Gonna watch him knock out Logan Paul?
I'm hoping that happens.
I'd very much like to see that.
I'm curious to see what's going to happen. He's going to have to try to do it when he's in the early rounds, I think.
Yeah.
But he looks like he's in good shape. I just worry about the age.
Yeah, I saw some pictures of him recently, and he definitely looks still pretty ripped. So I think he's got a good shot at it for sure.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I certainly wouldn't want to get hit by him.
Yes. I'll be very disappointed if he doesn't at least put him down once or twice.
Yeah.
I can't imagine somebody with that level of experience and that level of savagery inside them not being able to get that job done in some way, shape, or form.
Well, he still got that anger because I saw the interview where they were doing the weigh-in and he went and just slapped them.
Yeah.
So he still got that anger. So
yeah,
the eye of the tiger. We'll see tonight.
So you're going to tune in for that? That's on Netflix, isn't it?
Yeah. I thought it was a pay-per-view thing through Netflix, but it's actually free if you got Netflix.
Yeah, nice.
Just turn it on at 8. I think there's like 4 other fights before.
Yeah.
So
I currently do not have Netflix, and probably, despite how fun and exciting it would be to see Logan Paul get punched in the face, I probably will not bother. I'll probably just see the aftermath. But
I'm sure there'll be lots of clips.
yeah, I'm sure Netflix subscribers will consider that a nice little treat for themselves if they're already invested in that.
Well, I was surprised.
Yeah.
And not only that, today's also the day my wife comes home from her week-long business trip.
Oh, so did you have to survive on your own?
Exactly. It was very tough. I had to make my own meals, eat by myself, clean up by myself. All very disconcerting. But I pulled it off.
Glad to see you're still here. You seem to be clothed and reasonably well groomed. So I think that worked out well. She'll probably be excited that you survived on your own for a week.
Yeah. So she'll be home. Not for dinner, though. I think around 7. So she sent me a tweet. So I went back, sent her a text back saying, "Oh, 7. Well, just in time. I'll save you a seat for the Mike Tyson fight."
Yeah, nice.
I did not get a reply.
Thrilled.
Yeah.
Completely thrilled about that.
Yeah. And well, as you already know, and I'm sure our viewers are super excited to hear this,
Hmm.
I upgraded to Sonoma on my MacBook.
Yeah, nice.
So
Taking the
I'm only one
plunge.
generation short now. I'm only one behind.
Well, I'm glad to see you followed my advice because I've been doing that for years now, and I highly recommend it to everybody who owns a Mac. If you stay one version behind whatever the current operating system is, I feel like that's the way to go. I feel like that's the move to keep yourself from running into any problems or issues and just have a nice, productive work environment. That's definitely something I fully endorse and highly recommend.
I let other people experience the bugs and get them worked out. So when I
Yep.
get it, it's already bug free.
Yep. Solid plan for sure.
And on, well, good news, my physio and drugs that I've been taking made my shoulder a lot better.
Yeah,
Got
yeah, you seem a
full
lot perkier than the last episode for
mobility.
sure. Yeah.
Yeah, I was a dour mess last time. And the pain was brutal. It
Hmm.
was just like aching, but seems to be getting better. Still have that weird tingly in my forearm, but not as bad. I find my grip in my left hand not very strong,
Yeah.
but we're working on that with physio.
Nice.
But talking about health concerns, got my COVID and flu shot.
Hmm.
Yep. You got yours, didn't you?
Yes, I did about a month ago now.
Yeah.
Got them at the same time, which I'm guessing you did that as well. That's always fun, right? Because you get to compare the needle experience
Yeah.
in both arms. Yeah.
Which one hurts the most?
Yeah.
Actually, they're
I
pretty
always feel
good.
like the flu shot is the one I feel the most. The
Yeah.
COVID shot really doesn't feel like much to me.
Yeah. Neither of them really did much to me. But the nurse was saying to me, when I said, you know what, do whatever you want to do. I said, I went for allergy needles from when I was 8 years old till I was 22.
Hmm.
So my arms are like literally numb to needles. Don't
Hmm.
care. I could probably stick it in myself, wouldn't even flinch.
Hmm.
So they don't really
Nice.
affect me like they do other people.
Yeah.
Now, because my memory's so bad, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I doubt it because I don't think we were there. But I went to the Buffalo Bills game with my son.
Yeah, that was right after we recorded the last
Ah,
episode. So this is definitely
yeah,
news. Yes.
yeah. My son and I did our first road trip, went to Buffalo, spent 2 days in Buffalo, or 2 nights, 3 days, saw the sights, and went to the Bills game. Lots of fun.
As I recall, they kind of dominated in that game too, didn't they? Like destroy the Jets or something.
It was Tennessee,
All
and it
right.
got off to a bad start. It was just I was like, what is happening? We were behind like 10-0, but then they roared back. But we've always been sort of a second half team. We just like
Hmm.
it's like we give them the first half just to see how they're gonna play, and then we adjust everything and then just walk over people.
Yeah, nice.
But this weekend we're playing the Chiefs, so it'll be a bigger kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, the Bills and the Steelers are both kind of doing pretty well this season,
Yeah,
I've seen. Yeah, so that's exciting.
yeah. We were talking earlier, which our viewers would not be privy to, is talk about Blue Sky.
Hmm.
I noticed when I was on earlier, I was up to 600 followers. It went from like this
Nice.
meager amount, but it's literally exploded. A lot of
Hmm.
migration, I think, from Twitter and X.
Yeah, the exodus is real.
Oh, good play. I wish I had thought of that.
Yeah, I was
So
saving that
yeah,
one.
so Blue Sky is actually turning out to be not a bad little spot. I'm glad I got in there early.
Yeah, it was nice that we were able to get in there and get established before that train started rolling for sure.
Yeah, yeah, we're like grandfathers welcoming people in, holding our
Yes,
hands
yes.
out and bringing them aboard.
Hmm. Yeah. Veterans.
Yeah, I got two more things to wrap things up.
Uh-huh.
More braggartry
Oh,
by
yes.
me.
I know everybody's looking forward to this month's
Yeah.
braggartry.
One is Cutters Deep reach the 500. I wish. The 50
Yeah,
review
that was
mark.
wishful thinking
Sorry.
manifesting there, I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The 50 review mark. I was
Yeah.
at 49 for a long time. I think the last time I was telling it was like a loose tooth. I was just nagging at me. And
Hmm.
finally broke that 50 reviews. Lucky,
Nice.
almost all of them are nice. So,
Yeah, yeah, that's always a plus, right?
yep. And Candy Witch finally hit double digit reviews.
Hmm.
Another thing that was now, mind you, it's a new release. It just came out and it's a sizable book. So I was actually surprised that it hit the double digits already. So I
Hmm.
can't complain. Since
Yeah.
our last episode, things have been tickety boo, especially with my
Yeah.
shoulder better. I'm not as mopey as I was in the last episode.
Nobody wants Mopey Ron.
Uh,
Nobody wants Mopey Ron.
yeah. So tell us what you've been doing, because I've been wasting half the show just telling about my crap.
Nice.
But I want to share it with everybody.
This is always a weird time of year for the show because we're recording this episode in November, but
Yeah.
obviously this is the first episode of the new year. So there's a little bit of temporal displacement happening here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some stuff that's yet to happen for me, but has actually already happened by the time you see this. So buckle up for that. But yeah, this is my end of the year wrap up time. Basically, just getting everything ready for the release of 8 at the beginning of 2025. Super excited about that. I'll probably talk a little bit about that more extensively in next episode because that'll be the official launch of the Kindle edition, which is kind of like the big showstopper when it comes to new releases these days for me.
Right.
But in terms of wrapping things up for the end of the year, the big thing that's kind of been sucking up most of my time has been audiobook sprawl, is what I'm calling it. Basically, because as I mentioned in last episode, I've been trying to get the first 7 books from the Nodwell's timelines all done as audiobooks before the end of the year. And I'm 99.9% sure that's going to happen. I'm sure by the time you see this episode, all those books will be available as audiobooks. But one thing that I've been doing as part of that is going back and revisiting some of the first books that I did with Amazon's virtual voice technology, because as you might expect, that being a sort of in development, in progress technology, it's improving almost daily. And so some of those first books that I did using that tech, like 309 and Shards, the technology available to make those sound better has improved considerably since I initially released them. So, for example, I recently went back through and redid Shards and re-released that with a more enhanced version of its audio. So that's pretty cool. And actually, as we're recording this episode, I'm wrapping up I guess you'd call it sort of like a remastering or a retooling of 309. And we'll have that done for sure within the next few days. So that'll be cool. That'll be a nice opportunity for people who haven't gotten a chance to check those out yet, or maybe check them out previously and weren't particularly feeling the virtual voice thing. This will be a chance to see the updated, improved, enhanced version of that tech. One thing that's kind of interesting about that, though, as I've been working on the subsequent books throughout the year and the tech has been improving, some of the later books, I think actually I probably won't need to go in and redo them because they're already on the newer versions of the technology, which I think sounds pretty good already.
Yeah.
But it will be just a question of at what point do they make enhancements that justify going in and doing this remastering or this retooling of the book. So that's been kind of wild and kind of interesting and definitely time consuming because when you talk about a book like 309, which is 134,000 plus words and 14-ish hours of audio, going back through that and updating it and kind of refiddling with everything is a very time consuming, laborious process. But I really feel like it's worth it. When I listen to the quality of the virtual voice stuff now versus what it was when I did that book back in April, I feel like it's justified to spend the time going through and updating it because the finished product, I think, benefits so much from the enhancements in the tech. So that's been kind of an unexpected thing, something that I wasn't really planning to do, but that I felt was a good thing to do, especially with 500 and the spiral and the threads and the last couple of books in that set of 7 initial books coming out here at the end of the year. I just want to make sure everything is as dialed in and as updated and as quality as it can possibly be. But then what I think I'll probably end up doing is taking a little pause or taking a little break from the audiobook stuff to concentrate on getting 8 out the door and getting ready to announce my next book, which I'll probably be doing on next episode. So look forward to that. And then the only other thing I wanted to mention real briefly about the audiobook stuff is another interesting development with all of that is that before you weren't able to publish short form books via their system, but they've since opened that up a little bit. So one thing that I've been able to do is actually go in and do the story singles from 8 as audiobooks as well. So by the time you hear this or see this episode, several of those, if not all of those, should be released on Audible as well. The only kind of downside to that is because there's some limitations in how they let you structure your pricing working with that system. They're a little pricier than I would like them to be, but if anybody is real keen on the audiobook thing and wants to check those out before the book is actually released, they're pretty cool. One thing I really like about the story singles is they're kind of all in that 45-minute to hour long mark, which I think is a nice little chunk of audio for somebody to listen to get like a little taste of A, the upcoming book, and B, my style in general. And so one thing that I've noticed from having the first one out for a few weeks is that people seem to be using that as a nice initial point of engagement for my stuff. And basically as an opportunity to check out my audiobook work without a major time investment, right? Because some of the books are so long. But if you wanted to try the virtual voice thing and see if it's something you'd be into or if you kind of click with it, I think those story singles like Paper or Plastic are a good choice for that because it's sort of like a nice quick thing that you can experience within an hour. So all that to say, I've been super busy and super crazy as usual. I'm still kind of hoping to get some downtime squeezed in at the end of the year in the last couple of months of December, but who knows with all the insanity that's going on if that's actually going to happen. But I live in hope.
Have to have a dream.
Yeah, exactly. Well, let's just do the featured post.
Okay.
Okay. So this month's featured post is actually from a familiar author who you've probably seen or heard of on the show previously, Mr. Coy Hall, because he is releasing a book at right around the time we're recording this episode called The Switchblade Svengali. And I thought this would be a particularly interesting post to call out because it not only includes the front cover, back cover reveal for that book, but it also kind of lets you know that it is a bit of a sequel to a book we talked about on the show previously, which is A Séance for Wicked King Death, because the main character in this new book is actually the Royce Pembroke character from that previous book. So if you're familiar with A Séance for Wicked King Death and enjoyed that book. As I recall, Ron and I both enjoyed that one quite a bit. You may want to keep an eye out for the Switchblade Svengali.
Can't go wrong with a Coy Hall book.
Indeed. So now, as has become our custom, we are a force of change in the podcast universe. And we have some new changes to lay on you. We're going to break down here real quick before we get into them. So, those of you who've been watching the show for a long time are well aware that one of the things we've historically done on the Postmortem Report is to talk about various things that we are into, right? Books, movies, television shows, video games, music, etc. Those things are not necessarily going away. However, one thing that we have done over the past few months, which I'm sure you're well aware of, is we have a bit of a spin-off show now in the form of Off the Clock. And one of the things we've decided to do in the interest of sort of streamlining the show a bit and making the main show a little more focused is to shift that stuff over to the Off the Clock spin-off show. And so starting this month, that's kind of where you're going to find those sorts of things from us moving forward, because we have a new segment, which we are going to get into here very shortly, called The Writer's Life, where we're actually going to be talking about various topics that are hopefully going to be interesting not only to other writers, but to readers of our works who might be interested in getting some insights into what makes us tick as authors. So, without further ado, let's ease on in to our first Writer's Life conversational topic, which is our origin stories. Because everybody starts somewhere, and we have a lot of ground to cover because we're old.
Very old.
Yes. So the way I thought we would approach this, I think will make this a little more digestible and give us a little more opportunity to talk back and forth a bit more, which is another objective that we have for this new segment, is to break this down into the various eras of our lives. Maybe going a little Taylor Swift with this one. But I wanted to start with the first 20 or so years of our lives and what led us to becoming authors. And I'll kick things off here real quick, kind of pitch things over to you, but feel free to jump in at any time if you would like to inject anything into this little rant that I'm about to go on.
Absolutely.
Okay. So for me personally, I actually always wanted to be a writer. However, even when I was a little kid, I kind of realized that that probably wasn't going to be something that was likely to happen for me for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being that I kind of knew even as a little kid that that wasn't a particularly lucrative profession. And I kind of leaned more towards things in my youth that I thought might be more beneficial to me in terms of being able to earn a living and have an easier time doing that sort of thing. And so even as a little kid, despite my strong desire to be creative and do things like writing, I kind of always viewed it more as a hobby or a secondary thing or something that I would perhaps maybe do in my free time or my spare time, and never really thought of it from a professional standpoint at all as an option or as a potential career path. So I'd be kind of curious to know if that was how things started out for you.
Pretty much. I think most writers probably were writing from the very beginning. I mean, I'm sure
Hmm.
there's some people that when they're in their 30s go, oh, I could write a book because I've had lots of people always say, well, then write one. But to actually
Hmm.
sit down and do it, it's a completely different thing. But as far as I can remember, I just wrote stuff. For
Hmm.
me, I can actually remember my very first story that I wrote in a class, like in grade school. And it was about a sheep that got lost in a snowstorm, and the farm dog went out into the storm to find it. And through all its trials and tribulations, which I think was like about 5 lines, it finds the sheep, brings it back to the farm. Everybody's happy. And the big hook ending was the sheep and the dog fall in love and got married.
Excellent.
Yeah,
I was shipping the sheep and the dog right from the start. Yeah.
yeah,
So I'm glad
yeah.
that worked
No one
out.
saw that coming.
Yeah. Excellent.
But funny enough, considering I write horror, when I was younger, I basically wrote more humorous essays kind of
Oh,
stuff.
okay.
I was a big fan of Mad Comics, and
Hmm.
a friend of mine that I grew up with, we used to like make our own version of Mad Comics,
Nice.
basically plagiarizing their jokes and pretending they were ours kind of thing. But we'd come up
Nice.
with our own sort of flavor and make our, I don't know what we called it now, but that was it. It was always kind of trying to write humorous stuff. And I also, actually, it's funny because I always used to say, more or less they were poems. I wrote poems, but I
Hmm.
used to call them lyrics. And I don't know why I used to be able to, in my head, think up these like rhyming little stories and stuff.
Yeah.
And it was really
Sort of like
easy.
proto limericks or
No, no, they were like, they'd be like almost like a full song or a full
okay.
poem by Leonard Cohen. And I
Okay.
would just sit in my, and because they were more emotional though. The humorous ones were just funny thoughts that I had. I remember one I went on and on about when you go for Chinese food, it's like the spare ribs. That what kind of an animal has
Has these
ribs
little
that small?
ribs. Yeah,
Yeah.
nice.
And I was like, what is it I'm eating exactly? And it was, and I went on about it. It was too long. But anyways, I thought ridiculous things in my head I would
Hmm.
think of, and I just write these humorous little thoughts out. And the poems were just something, they were more emotional. Like if,
Hmm.
you broke up with a girlfriend or whatever. But if someone asked me,
Yeah.
are those poems? No, they're lyrics.
Yeah, yeah.
I would write that for like a song because poems were there.
Hmm.
And one day at school, because I was a shirker, I was supposed to hand in, we were supposed to do an essay on like the great poets of whatever, or write your own kind of thing. And I don't know what transpired, but I didn't do anything. So I got to homeroom class and I was panicking, but I wasn't going to give up whatever I was supposed to do. And I was always a last minute project kind of person. So I got into homeroom and I thought, I can't write anything, obviously, for an essay on like Byron.
Yeah, yeah.
So I decided to quickly write out a poem. And as a matter of fact, I have that poem here.
Oh,
I'm going to
nice.
read it to you.
Nice.
It was called Ode to a Poet by Ron McGilvery. So silly. It said, here is a poem written for you, done on request by my teacher. That's you. I don't like Keats, Wordsworth, or Byron. To tell you the truth, I'm back here crying. I grant this to them, they were good in their day, but for me to read this, I ought to be paid. All of these poems are all like the other. For all I know, they were probably brothers. Now that you've read this, I'm probably in a stew. I can picture your face a nice tint of blue. I don't know about the others, but coming from me, I will be happy if I pull off a D. And I still have, this is what I handed in. You can see my crappy writing.
Uh-huh. Nice.
What does it say? I can't see. I'm blocking it. See, it's
Yeah.
like 10 out of 10.
Yeah,
I got an
nice.
A.
Yeah,
I
nice.
couldn't believe it. And she called me out in class and read it out loud.
That's hilarious.
And I was like, see, we're sitting in class and I was just like, kept my head down, going, oh, I'm going to catch shit. And I was waiting for it. And she goes, I'd like to take a moment before I hand these out to talk about something that someone handed in that surprised me quite a bit. And then they read out loud. And then when she started reading it, I was thinking, oh, it's probably one of the brainiacs or something. First line, I knew exactly what she was reading. So when
Uh-huh.
she was reading it, I didn't know how she was going to spin it. This is the biggest piece of trash. Someone who does not care about the class and get
Yeah.
out or something
Yeah,
like
yeah.
that.
Yeah.
But when she told me, she goes, I was so impressed. And I was just like, oh, and I think, the teacher's name was Stoddard, Mrs.
Yeah.
Stoddard. I can remember
Yeah.
that because she left such an indelible impression on me that maybe some of this writing that I was doing actually,
Yeah, could resonate.
yeah,
Yeah.
perfect word, with somebody else. And I was like, maybe it's not just all crap.
Yeah.
So
Nice.
that really got me started. Those are the high school days. Long
Hmm.
ago had gone
In
the
the
days of sheep and dogs getting married,
Yeah, yeah, in the long ago and the far away. Yeah.
but it was a seed in my head, just
Well, it's
as
it's interesting that you wrote lyrics because, I am a musician. I used to write songs and lyrics pretty frequently, and that was actually some of my earliest writing, especially when I was a teenager. My most sincere writing efforts growing up were songs and lyrics and occasional short stories. Because my only other real attempt at publishing back in the day was writing and submitting short stories to Analog, Science Fiction, Science Fact, back when Stanley Schmidt was the editor. And I remember this because I got many a rejection letter from Mr. Schmidt for pretty much everything I submitted to said magazine. But I appreciated that and appreciated the fact that my stuff even got looked at in some cases. And it was actually kind of helpful in a way because it showed me how much further I had to go as a writer to even have a shot at something like that. And that was, of course, back in my teens, my late teens, leading up to my 20s was my first real stab at publishing anything, which did not bear any fruit,
yeah.
but was like a good learning experience for sure.
Yeah, well, that's what it is. When you're younger, I think writing poetry or lyrics, it's an emotional thing that comes from,
Hmm.
which younger people with teens, full of emotion. Lots of
Hmm.
changes going on in your life. Everything's drama. Everything's more intense because it's like your first time, most of the time that situations are happening, you've experienced. And so when you're writing it, it comes out. Where with stories, even short stories, we don't have the life experience to really nuance characters or
Hmm.
know what works and what doesn't with flows and stuff like that.
Hmm.
So yeah, I'd be curious how many people actually write or started writing lyrics or poetry at the
Yeah.
beginning.
And the thing is, when I stopped and thought about it, I was like, I actually did write a lot in my early years, from childhood all the way up to, let's say, 20, for the sake of having a stopping point. There was a lot of stuff that I wrote in that time period, but I would say, I've heard people say that your first million words are like practice. And I think that's true. I probably wrote well over a million words in my youth, but I would say 90 to 95% of that stuff was just practice. It was just me figuring out how to write, how to actually do those sorts of things. But then I think the other thing that really changed my thinking on writing and changed my ability as a writer was actually going to college and actually taking up a writing related major in the form of journalism that really helped hone my skills as a writer and made it more of a formal kind of practiced kind of regimented experience as opposed to just something I was doing for fun, right? And I think that was like a big corner in my case, sort of transitioning into the next phase of life and realizing, oh, to do this at the level that I would like to be able to do it at is going to require some level of training and discipline and effort beyond just sort of messing around. And it's actually kind of funny in my case because I ended up majoring in journalism, not so much because I wanted to be a journalist or because I wanted to be a writer, but because I thought it would make a good complement to the technical skills that I had developed on my own. Because my original profession, which some of you may know, for many years was actually IT. I worked for over 20 years as what would be referred to these days as a full stack software engineer. But the irony of that is I don't actually have a degree in computer science or computer engineering or anything like that. All of my computer skills are self-taught, but I came from a time period where that was good enough. But I chose the major that I did, and I chose the sort of educational path that I did because one of the things I realized was that a big thing that a lot of technical people lack is the ability to effectively and articulately communicate their knowledge to others. And so that's why I chose journalism as a major in college. So I wanted to hone those skills so that I would be very adept at communicating and actually be able to leverage those abilities on top of the technical skills that I taught myself. And that actually ended up really paying off for me in my early career through my 20s and 30s, especially in terms of making me a very unique combination in that space of someone who had really strong, highly developed technical skills, but also had the ability to communicate effectively about them. So that was kind of the middle of my journey toward where I ended up. How did things roll for you, sort of 20s into your 30s, as far as writing stuff
Well, when
goes?
I got out, I didn't stop writing, but I was still writing sort of my lyrics. I was writing my humorous essays, and I was dabbling a bit more in short stories. When I went away to university, I took English, but I only lasted a year because when I was there, no one liked any kind of genre writing. Because if I was
Mm-hmm.
going to write short stories, I always wanted to try to write like a mysteries. That's what I was thinking in my head I would write.
Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of the stuff I was reading, well, I read a lot of horror, and it never dawned on me to like sell horror. Because I figured only Stephen King and Dean Koontz and John Soule, because the only books we ever saw in the bookstore by them. So I thought, well, they've got the market covered. And I always liked mysteries, and I was trying to write those, but it was just, I don't know. I don't want to like put people in a box, but when I went there, it was just very frowned on. It was like you have to be writing about wheat fields,
Yeah.
try to write the Great Canadiana. That's
Yeah.
what you're supposed to strive for here. And
Mm-hmm.
these people were just the worst writers,
Mm-hmm.
worst writers. And I was just like, I can't do this. And no matter what, because you had to criticize or critique, sorry, not criticize,
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
critique each other's stuff. And my critiquing was always, well, it doesn't go anywhere. That's what's good. It's you're the embodiment of the feeling that you get that you're like there in the Rocky Mountains and the ice, and I was just like, not for me. So I
Yeah.
figured I need a trade because I still knew I wanted to try writing, but I needed a trade.
Hmm.
So I went more the business route and
Hmm.
figured, well, if I got a good job, I can write on the side. Then a friend of mine, two actually friends, ended up working for television,
Hmm.
and they were working. We were a smaller town back then, even though we're still the capital of Canada. It
Hmm.
was smaller stations. It was big, huge stuff like NBC, and it was very small pool of writers, and it was incestuous. Like even if you couldn't write, if you knew or were, sleeping with the producers or whatever, you were getting in.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as they moved up, they knew I wrote, and I was always giving them stuff, and they were like, "You should try to publish this." And I was like, "Oh, we'll see." So they were bringing me in, going, "Can you fix up these scripts? Try to punch them up a bit." And
Mhm.
I knew nothing about script writing, so I knew. I mean, I watched a lot of movies, so I sort of taught myself how the scripts work, and I'd go in and I'd punch stuff up at night because then we
Mhm.
ended up all moving in together. So we were like a sort of a consortium doing stuff. They both worked for TV. One was specialized more on the directing side, and the other one more on editing and videotaping, and
Mhm.
also music. So we were sort of a compact unit, and so we could do stuff at night. So I started to learn more about the script writing and stuff. And I tried my hand at trying to do full blown scripts. And I started doing that for quite a while. But one thing I found with scripts is too many fingers in the pie, and where the person always gets left out because you do all the upfront work
Mhm.
and then they go, "Yeah, budget didn't come through. We're not doing it. You're
Yeah.
getting nothing." And when you're younger, you're just biting at any opportunity, right? And
Sure.
I can't even count how many times I got played. But I
Yeah.
learned a lot. I learned how to the timing, beats, the ups and downs, the flows of the storyline. Because there were some writers that I actually came across that were actually good, and I got tips from them. But that was the turning point because I didn't want to be one cog in the wheel and always being let down. That's when I
Mhm.
turned to prose.
Mhm.
I thought I'm going to try to write. Well, I knew poetry, unless you want to be poor and kind of like
Yeah.
live the bohemian lifestyle,
Yeah.
I would try to do prose. So I kind of worked on that. A lot of people have actually commented how my stories now or my books play out like movies in your head
Mhm.
kind of thing. So they are sort of very cinematic because that's how stories kind of evolve in my head. So I
Sure.
guess it's very influenced by those sort of early days, which were sort of influential.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I tried my hand writing mysteries, but found that my mysteries had all very dark themes. And
You don't
yeah,
say.
yeah. And I was kind of like, I don't know. It took me a while to clue in, which is silly because I read so many horror books and I just thought
Mhm.
maybe I'm gonna try to write horror. I was resisting it because there wasn't a huge market
Mhm.
for it.
Yeah.
But then I got an invite from a friend for an opportunity to join this, getting back to script writing, Zoetrope Studios, that Francis Ford Coppola had that he started. He had an
Okay.
online studio where he was bringing in writers and stuff. And someone I'd worked with in the past invited me into their virtual studio.
Yeah.
So I got in there and started doing some stuff with that. But it's even when you got a bigger players in there,
Hmm.
more cutthroat than even the imbeciles that I had to deal with on a local level. It was harsh. It was
Yeah.
harsh. And I was just like, and even if you knew it was good, if they know it's good, they're going to tear it apart even worse because
Right.
everyone was fending for themselves. And I didn't
Sure.
like it.
Yeah.
But Zoetrope Studios opened up a magazine called Zoetrope to coincide because they had this wine magazine because Coppola had this big winery. So he started this wine magazine.
Yeah, that's the one he sold to make Megalopolis, I think.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Could be.
Yeah.
Because then I guess he said, well, I've already got this magazine. Why don't I have sort of a literature magazine as well? So he started Zoetrope, the magazine. So he opened up a virtual office for prose writers. So I was able to get in sort of on the, I guess, the ground level of that.
Nice.
And that's where I cut my teeth and really learned a lot. That was actually how I got invited to the horror library. That's where they actually began, was through Zoetrope.
Okay.
And I started writing with their team and started publishing stuff through them on their online presence. And then, oh God, I'm trying to think. I don't know, just kind of steamrolled. And I
Yeah.
was starting to publish here and there and different things. And well, I don't want to get ahead of
What,
my time because
yeah, I was going to
that's
say, what
still
does
sort
this,
of
where does this take us up to in terms
in my
of
20s.
years?
It's coming up to the late 20s at this point.
Okay. Yeah, you're good.
I kind of pulled back at that point because I started a production company,
Hmm.
which was the Cellar Dweller projects.
Hmm.
And we started to do that. Well, we had pretty good success with that. We had one of our films was premiered at the World Horror Convention.
Hmm.
That was held the first time ever in Canada and also in the Shocklines Film Festival in New York City.
Hmm.
I had short stories going out. I had script work. I had the production company. Things were going well.
Hmm.
And then
Bum, 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 bum.
I'll stop there.
Okay. Okay. You gotta leave us with a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Until that time, it was short stories and scripts. I don't think it
Hmm.
even dawned. I mean, obviously, it must have dawned on me, to try to write a novel. But
Hmm.
I don't think I had the be able to sit in a seat
Hmm.
and do that. Did
Yeah.
you, like, when was the first time you thought, I'm going to try a novel?
So my first novel attempt was actually in my early 20s. So right at the beginning of this
Wow.
era. Yeah. Because I was in college and I thought, well, I'm in college. And this was actually before I made the change to journalism. Because when I first started going to college, I actually did major in computer science, but I never made it that deep into the program because I very quickly figured out that with computer science, everything I wanted to learn from that degree path, I had already
Uh-huh.
learned on my own through my own efforts as a hobbyist. That was just the era where if you really wanted to learn about computers, you could learn pretty much everything there was to learn about them from books or from hands-on experience as a hobbyist or whatever.
Yeah.
And so when I got to college and started in computer science, I was actually very disappointed by it. It really didn't hold my interest because they're trying to teach me things that I already knew. Right.
Right.
I'm like, yeah, okay, cool. And so that was what really shifted my thinking towards, okay, well, if I'm going to get a degree in something, maybe I should get a degree in something that I'm not already completely comfortable and familiar with, which is what kind of led me to journalism. But point of all that being that while I was in college initially and I was still in computer science and kind of figuring all of that stuff out, one of my side projects, especially during summertime when I was not in school, was I wanted to take a stab at writing a novel. And so I actually did that over the span of a summer between, I think it was like my sophomore and my junior year of college, and basically finished it, basically got it done. It was about 90,000-ish words by the time I was all said and done with it. And it was not very good. It was very, I would say, the thing that I always say in retrospect when I think about that first novel is I think of it as being very derivative. I think of it as a case where I was kind of wearing a lot of my influences on my sleeve as a writer at that point, and there was way too much of the other things that had influenced me and inspired me to want to write the novel in the novel, and way too little of myself in it.
Right.
Right. And I think that was my big lesson and my big takeaway from that whole experience was if I'm going to write something, it needs to be a manifestation of me in some way. It's not good enough to just try to regurgitate what somebody else has done. You have to really bring something interesting or worthwhile or unique to the table, in my mind, to justify that level of effort. That was kind of one of my big revelations or one of my big moments when I finished that project and I looked it over and I was like, yeah, this is done. This works. This is exactly what it needs to be considered a finished product. But I'm never publishing this. I'm never going to try to publish this. I'm probably not even going to let a lot of people read it because I kind of knew right from the beginning, this is not what I want to put my name on. This is not what I want people to think of as me whenever I put something out there. So that was a very big learning experience and a very big kind of gut check for me. And I think another thing that kind of drove me away from the premise or the possibility of being a writer professionally, because I kind of realized, oh, wait, if I'm struggling to do this, would I ever want to try to pursue this as a profession? And that experience kind of made me go, well, hell no, right? I'm going to be a computer programmer and make computer programmer money, right? And that'll be how I earn my living and how I pay the bills and all that. And then I wouldn't say that it killed my desire to write creatively, but it certainly put it on pause for a while, right? Like finishing that project and having that be the end result of it kind of did make me sort of step away from that sort of stuff for a while. And in fact, I pretty much went through the rest of my 20s and well deep into my 30s before I even really considered or thought of writing creatively again after that experience. But one thing that I kind of did come to, which is I think what eventually brought me back to writing, was the idea of having worked for all those years in the IT world and as a programmer. One of the big things that I really found myself wanting was something with more permanence. Because one of the weird things about software development as a profession is that, with a few notable exceptions, a lot of the work that you end up doing is very disposable. It feels very impermanent in a lot of ways. Like I've written so many millions and millions of lines of code over the years that ended up either being replaced or deprecated or gotten rid of in some fashion. There's very few things that I worked on in my 20s and 30s as a software engineer that actually have stood the test of time very well. And that's not because they weren't good, quality, meaningful things that served a purpose at the time that they were done, but it's just the nature of the profession. There's always something new. There's always a new version of something. There's always a new take on how to do something. And therefore, these things that you end up creating that can be monumental in terms of their scope and scale don't really have a shelf life, right? It's not like I can point to something that I did as a software engineer 20 years ago and be like, oh, look, here that thing is that I made that's still there doing exactly what it was supposed to do 20 years ago. Those sorts of things typically don't exist unless you're talking about some sort of preservation effort where it's like, oh, there's this old video game that somebody wants to keep around in its original form. And so people try to preserve that in some way as a historical record or something like that. But as far as business work, the work that I did as a software engineer for the education technology industry or the university that I worked for, or the Fortune 500 companies that I worked for as a consultant and stuff like that. Those things were very sort of transient. They don't exist anymore. And that was a very kind of sobering thing, especially as I got into my late 30s, where I was like, man, I really want to make something that's actually going to exist for some length of time and perhaps maybe even exist after I'm not here anymore. And the more I thought about that, especially as I got into my late 30s, I thought, what can I do? What's something I can do that is going to have some permanence to it? Maybe perhaps make some sort of lasting impression in the world. And that was kind of what really led me back toward writing and doing more creative things and things where I get to control the destiny of the thing. Because that's another thing that happens when you're a software engineer is oftentimes you're working on these very big projects that involve a lot of different people and a lot of different chefs in the kitchen, so to speak. Kind of like what you were saying about film, right? Where it's like,
yeah.
There's so many moving parts to it, and there's so many people involved that your individual contribution to it, significant as it might be, isn't the same as, say, something like writing a novel. And the other thing that was a big contributing factor in all of this is I'm trying to think of the best way to say this without it sounding like a pity party, but obviously a lot of people are aware that I am visually impaired, and I've been that way since I was born. And one of the things about the condition that I have is that it's degenerative in nature. So as I age, my vision gets worse. And one of the consequences of that, and one of the things that came about as a result of that, is especially as I got into my late 30s and into my 40s, it became very apparent to me and very evident to me that I was not going to be able to operate and function at the same level visually that I had, say, in my 20s and early 30s. And so a lot of the things that I was doing as a software engineer were very visually demanding, extremely visually demanding. Would have been tough for somebody with perfect vision to pull off. And so I kind of came to a realization that I needed to make some kind of transition away from that career path because it just wasn't going to be sustainable for me because of the degenerative nature of my vision. And so that really was another big contributing factor that sort of led to me moving back towards a more creative, or I should say, less visually focused career path, which is ironic, right? Because I think a lot of people would look at something like writing and publishing and say that's a very visual thing, editing, typesetting, pagination, all these things that are involved in creating and producing publications are very visual, but compared to what I was doing as a software engineer, they're like very simple by comparison. So it almost seems like I'm giving myself a little bit of a break in a way, just because the stuff that I was doing before was just so crazy and so intense and so draining in that regard. So yeah, that kind of takes me to the end of my 30s.
What's interesting
Yeah, go ahead.
when you're saying that, especially you found your early work sort of derivative of other things, but I think every writer does that
Hmm.
because you don't have your voice yet and you emulate who you admire.
Hmm.
Because I know for myself, I was a huge fan of Robert B. Parker. And I
Hmm.
mean, if you had read any of my early attempts at mysteries and crime stuff, I mean, it was just like regurgitating his whole style,
Yeah, yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and which is funny.
Hmm.
You could probably, if you were a big fan of his, you'd probably still see it today.
Hmm.
It'd be harder to pick up because it's a completely different genre.
Yeah.
But I have, a lot of sort of snappy dialogue, things move along quickly.
Hmm.
But yeah, it was the same. I would read my stuff and go, oh. But then again, I think I want to write like a Sherlock Holmes book. I went out of my way to sort of, I think, emulate that. I want to write my kind of version of that sort of stuff. So it was
Hmm.
interesting to hear basically the same thing that I went through, which I'm
Hmm.
sure now that I'm thinking about it while I was listening to 90% of the writers probably went through the same thing because you
Yeah.
emulate somebody.
Well, right. You have to start from somewhere. Somebody that you read inspired you enough to make you think, I'd like to do something like that. Right. Because I think
Yeah,
that's the catalyst for a lot of people.
yeah,
What gets them going on this stuff is they want to impact somebody in the way that they were impacted.
yeah.
Yeah.
So it was like I probably misquoting here because think for me there was a quote, and I think it was from Toni Morrison. I just I think it was from her, but it was like if there's a story that you'd like to read but hasn't been written yet, you should
Hmm.
write it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's been sort of my whole credo because I was just like I write sort of for myself,
Hmm.
I love a lot of books. I enjoy a lot of books, but then sometimes I have an idea and I'm just like, look, especially with movies, I'm like, I feel like a apocalypse movie that has something and then you can't find it, or it's something I've already watched 8,000 times,
Yeah.
something like Night of the Living Dead, which is such a big influence on me.
Hmm.
But that's it. You just write what you want.
Yeah.
But as we go into the sadder part of my journey in writing, things were looking up. I was actually feeling good. I mean, my short stories were being sold. I still had no idea about or any gumption to write a novel because I was doing a lot of script stuff,
Hmm.
or films were going to festivals. They were being well received. Short stories were being published. Everything was going tickety boo. And then 2008 hit. Everything changed. The markets and investors dried up like the plague. It was just no one was spending money. Everyone was diving into their bunkers,
Yeah.
hiding. It was like pandemonium everywhere. And one of the first things to go is the market for making movies or any
Hmm.
kind of script work. No one was spending money. It was a complete utter disaster. And we had one film that we were in the process of finishing up, and then our lead actress walked out in the middle of it
Mm-hmm.
because her boyfriend, I don't know if he thought we were doing, because of course horror movies and stuff are all shot at night
Mm-hmm.
because that's the ambiance. So I don't know if he thought we were all having some kind of like mass orgies or something with his girlfriend, but he was like,
Uh,
he was upset, and I guess he made a big thing to her, an ultimatum to her. You either,
uh-huh.
it's me or this film.
Uh-huh.
So she made the tough decision, and she left, and it just coincided with the crash of everything else, and it was just, that was it. And then my son was still young at that point, and I made the decision then that I was just gonna put my effort into providing for my family, doing what I could to survive through this downturn. And people were laying off everyone left, right, and center. I was lucky. I managed to ride the wave through, but that was it. 2008, after all that, I stopped writing.
Yeah.
Nothing. I had a notebook that I keep by my bed, and then there's another one that's downstairs in the TV room, and I'd write ideas, and that was it. I just didn't have the energy to write. I was disenfranchised with the whole everything.
Yeah.
All the publishers, even when I thought I had a good story, I'd look and, oh, that magazine's gone, that anthology's gone. They all, 2008 hit everybody, and
Yeah.
the arts specifically bad.
Mm-hmm.
And that was pretty well it for me. I stopped for like more than a decade
Yeah.
of not publishing one thing, which
Mm-hmm.
is weird. But by
Yeah.
that point, my son started playing competitive soccer. So we were on the weekends going on the road a lot. When he was
Mm-hmm.
playing games, we were with him all the time. And I just put all my effort into work and into my son as he grew up.
Mm-hmm.
I don't regret it at all. I think during that time, a lot of things changed in the market.
Mm-hmm.
So if we fast forward this video, it may feel like it's going really fast because we zoom over a decade in the
Yeah. Yeah.
future, and then COVID hits.
Mm-hmm.
So from one BS moment to another BS moment,
Yeah. Yeah.
it was another shock to the system and a kick to the head. And then my son had moved out. He was at university. So with him gone at school, and I just thought to myself, well, I'm going to convert his bedroom into an office because I
Mm-hmm.
had an office downstairs, but then my wife, they closed their office
Yeah. She's had to start working from
in
home, right?
Ottawa, and
Yeah.
they became all everybody became home office workers, which actually worked out really well,
Mm-hmm.
except I was displaced yet again. So I moved all James stuff out, and this is actually where my son used to sleep. Now it's
Uh-huh.
my office.
Yeah.
And I started tinkering with writing again. And I'd been reading a lot because instead of writing, I'd come home and I'd read at night or before bed, I always read. So I'd read quite a bit. And the whole sort of Amazon thing
Mm-hmm.
led a whole new library of authors, brought them to my attention. So I was reading a
Mm-hmm.
lot of different stuff that wasn't the same kind of polished, sort of neutral ground horror. There was a
Right.
lot of experimental stuff, a lot of stuff way out there, a lot of creative stuff. and it was opening my eyes to a whole bunch of stuff. I guess I thought, look, I could write a novella or a novel, but I went to my standby to the short stories.
Mm-hmm.
So I started tinkering from that, started doing a few, and I thought, pass it around to a few people, and they thought, oh, that's really good. But with, as I mentioned, the advent of Amazon and stuff, I thought, I'm not going to submit any of these stories. I'm
Right.
going to collect them and I'm going to put them in my own. If nothing else, I'll have a collection of stories in a book that I can put on my shelf, give to my friends,
Mm-hmm.
and go, there's my name that will live for eternity
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
And Parkland, actually, here's a tidbit, was the street that I grew up on,
Mm-hmm.
which I always thought had a major influence on me. So that's why it was Tales from the Parkland. Stuff that
Nice.
happened, culminated over the years into my head. And that's how that came to be. I had no idea, didn't know anybody, wasn't on social media. I just thought, well, going in blind, see what happens. So my wife and my son helped me get on social media. I think I was just on Facebook and
Mm-hmm.
I kind of started talking about my collection. And then I got on Twitter.
Mm-hmm.
And then surprisingly, people started picking up this book and good reviews started coming. And
Mm-hmm.
it's like a dopamine fix when you get a
Yeah.
like on
Yeah.
your social media. I was like, oh, people actually like it. And this is nothing because in the old days, when you put in a magazine, you never got any reviews. There wasn't like a back cover of the magazine that people wrote you letters going, great story in that magazine.
Right. Right.
It was nothing.
Yeah.
It's just, it was out there and you had no idea if people liked it or not.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know anything about Goodreads back then. I mean, hell, we were talking about it earlier. I used to send out self-addressed stamped envelopes
Yep.
to pay for my own rejection letters when I
Yep.
used to
Same. Yeah.
submit
Yep.
my story. Submitted the story, put another envelope in with the stamps on it so that they could reject it and not have to pay for it.
Yep. Yep.
So this whole thing changed for, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
good or worse. A lot of people have a lot of views on Amazon, but
Yeah.
it's been nothing but a blessing to me. Tales from the Parkland took off. I thought to myself, oh, maybe I should write another collection. But I had stories that I'd written for my son, and I thought if I could put it into a cohesive sort of novella length book, just like Tales was just sort of for me as a vanity thing, this would be for my son, so his name would like live on forever in sort of a book form,
Yeah.
you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
So I wrote that for him, published it, and people seem to like that one as well. It's gotten nothing but excellent reviews. There was a school, I believe it was in Minnesota, that were reading it, and it just shows you how online presence, like people now anywhere around the
Mm-hmm.
world can read your books now. It was like a
Yeah.
whole new world.
Yeah.
And as I sort of became more familiar with social media and stuff and got to talk to other authors and learn different things, I decided to try my hand at a novel.
Mm-hmm.
I did not know what a horror show it was going to be. It was just
Yeah.
about the death of me.
Yeah.
I have a very low attention span, a very bad memory. So I was having a hard time even remembering what some of the characters were doing at the beginning. So I was having to reread stuff constantly, write notes for myself, and put them on the boards that you see all around my office.
Mm-hmm.
But It took me a while because I'm not super prolific writer, but Cutter's Deep came out. And that was different because the first two were kind of no expectations.
Yeah.
Tales from the Parkland and James Journey were both vanity things, one for my son, one for me. This one, though, was like, okay, these other two did well. People liked it. What happens if I have no ability to write a novel? And everyone's just like, yeah, good try in the first two. Go back to that because you cannot write a novel. So when I sent it out into the world, it was very nerve-wracking.
Mm-hmm.
I remember that one.
Trial by fire. Yeah.
It was brutal.
Yeah.
But once again, it dodged the bullet. People seem to like it because with me too, I like different, as you know,
Mm-hmm.
things that are like different. And so I don't know, is it too different? Is it not sort of neutral enough for mainstream? But people seem to have taken it in, gave me the courage to write. Well, a lot of people asked if there was going to be a sequel to The Cutter's Deep, because although it is closed, obviously the way it ends,
Right. There's a lot of potential there.
there is
Yeah.
potential there could be a follow up if you wanted to follow certain characters.
Mm-hmm.
I did not really want to do that because when you do have a low attention span, such as myself, you're easily bored as well. So I had an
Yeah.
idea and I tinkered with that one. And as I'm sure you know, when you're writing stuff at the beginning, it's you have the idea, you have the characters down, but then the characters kind of start talking to you in your head, and they would do this or they would say that.
Sure.
It just sort of led to, you know what? I could add some characters from Cutter's Deep into this. Now you could read either of them on their own. They're both standalones. But
Right.
if you read both of them, you get different insights
Mm-hmm.
on the same characters kind of thing. So I put that one out and I wasn't as nervous as Cutter's Deep, but still nervous because you don't want to fall on your face kind of thing.
Sure. Well, and once you have some form of success, that basically makes you question, will that success continue or will this next thing be a failure? Right. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So this was kind of a bit nerve-wracking in a different way, but not at the intensity that Cutter's Deep was.
Mm-hmm.
And it's too new right now, but I mean, it's only been out what a couple of months
Yeah. A
now,
couple of months as we're
and
recording this. Yeah.
all the reviews, knock on wood, have been good.
Mm-hmm.
And like, wow, this is a good follow-up, this is a really good story, blah blah. So, builds confidence. Where it all goes in the future, who knows? I mean, I am sort of working on something now, but still in the sort of the plotting out the early stages phase.
Mm-hmm.
But it's been a very roller coaster, loop de loop route to get here.
Yeah.
From writing about a girlfriend that dumped you to
Yeah. Sheep
lost
and
sheep,
dogs hooking up.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, to being a slacker poet and soon to be teacher's pet. Yeah, short
Mm-hmm.
stories, scripts. But it's like any journey. I mean, you learn from your mistakes. You learn from doing stuff, and that's eventually where you end up. What you find after you discard the stuff that doesn't work for you, you find something that does.
Yeah.
So,
So for me, the tail end of my journey thus far is it's interesting because I wasn't actually sure when you got back on the horse. And it's interesting to note that it was post COVID because I was always wondering about that, whether you had started back on that train before COVID happened or not. Because for me, I got back on the writing train in 2017, so a few years before COVID. And that was interesting, right? Because I was just sort of getting myself established and just sort of getting myself going. I had put out my first two novels and a novelette in 2017, 2018, and 2019, respectively.
Mhm.
And then I was just getting ready to do my first short story collection in 2020 when COVID happened. That was a very interesting experience, just seeing that massive influx of people coming into the writing space as a result of the pandemic.
Yeah.
I'm sure you're well aware, as everyone probably is, that so many people decided to pick up a pen when the
Yeah.
pandemic hit because it was like, well, what else am I going to do? I'm stuck in my house. Let's write a book.
Exactly. I do have a question though.
Yeah.
What was your catalyst like 2017? Was there something that
Yeah.
made you go,
Yeah. So in 2016, I was hired for what ended up being sort of my pinnacle job in the IT world. I was actually
okay,
hired as a director of software development for an education technology company. Ended up doing that job for about 6 or 8 months. And that was sort of the breaking point or the tipping point for me visually, because
uh,
I'd kind of gotten to a point where, because basically how the degradation of my vision has gone over the years has kind of been that, like, I'll have a major event of some sort that kind of causes things to degrade in a meaningful way. Like when I was a teenager, I had cataracts. When I was in my early 30s, I had an incident where I lost a decent chunk of my visual acuity and had to adapt to that and adjust to it. And then in 2016, going into 2017, was when the next big hit happened, where I started to
uh,
really experience a lot of eye fatigue and eye strain. And it was becoming increasingly difficult for me to continue to do my job, basically, which involved 60, 70, 80 hours a week of pretty hardcore software development, programming, database work, system admin work, system configuration work, monitoring of various systems. I was wearing a lot of different hats in the capacity that I was in at the time. And when that hit happened, when my vision really started to suffer again, was taking another bad hit, was kind of like the breaking point where I realized, okay, I can't do this anymore. I can't keep doing this to myself. I'm going to completely lose my ability to do any kind of meaningful work if I don't start taking better care of my eyes, basically.
uh,
And so that was what I did. At the beginning of 2017, I walked away from that job amicably. Of course, they understood what was going on with me and that it was a physiological issue. It wasn't that I didn't like the job or didn't want to do the work, I just couldn't. And so I took a few months at the beginning of 2017. I think that was like my 42nd birthday, something like that. I think I turned 42 that year. And I just took some time to kind of think about what I wanted to do, like realistically, what can I actually do? What I still have left in the tank visually that I can actually perhaps do something constructive and meaningful with the rest of my productive years. And so I sat down and I thought, you know what? I've had a lot of life experience since the last time I tried to write a novel. And I have a lot of really what I think are some pretty cool, pretty out there, pretty unique ideas for things that I have definitely never seen anybody else do creatively. Why don't I take another crack at this? Why don't I take another stab at this? And so I basically, right around my birthday in 2017, so like mid-March, I sat down and started writing The Big Men. That was an idea that had been kicking around in my head since the late 90s, was when I first came up with the concept for that book. But I didn't feel like I had the chops to write it until that point. I just remember sitting there writing it and going, wow, this is actually kind of good. Like, I would read this, I would buy this, I'd be happy if I bought this and read it, right? And that was a big kind of aha moment for me where I was like, wow, I actually have reached the point where I can actually do this at the level that I want to be able to do it, or would consider to be viable to actually do it. Not to say that it was easy by any means, because there were certain aspects of writing that book that were an absolute struggle. There's one of the chapters in that book that I literally rewrote probably a dozen times just because I was having trouble getting it right. It was such a critical moment in the book, and it was such a tricky, difficult concept to convey that this was like a 7,000 word chapter, right? So I was literally like writing it, scrapping it, rewriting it, scrapping it. I did that like probably a dozen times before I finally got it right. It finally clicked, and I'm like, okay, well, that was another encouragement moment where it was like, if I'd have gotten to that point in my youth, I might have folded. I might have given up. I might have just said, oh, I don't have it. I can't do this, right? But having done as much writing as I had done at that point, because by that point, I'd had my journalism degree for going on 20 years. I've been doing so much technical writing as a IT professional. I've been publishing blogs and doing podcasts and all these other creative side projects that I'd had for so many years leading up to that point, that I feel like I had the confidence finally to be able to push through all that and actually get over all of those hurdles. And so, unlike the first novel, when I got to the end of The Big Men and I finished it and read it back, I was like, damn, like I can actually do this. And then that was kind of when the switch flipped. I realized, okay, if I'm ever going to do this, if I'm ever going to try something like this is my shot. This is my chance. I had obviously some money in the bank from all those years of working IT jobs. And so I was able to just basically take that year or so that I wrote my first two novels in and just focus on that and just do that exclusively. And that's where The Big Men in 309 came from, was just being able to set everything else aside and take the time and just grind those first two novels out and get them out the door. Now, what ended up happening was, of course, being a completely unknown author starting from scratch in 2017, it took a long time for me to get established. So even with those, especially 309 was a pretty well received book when it came out in 2018, but that was just more of a putting me on the map kind of thing, as opposed to having any kind of meaningful financial impact. So I was still very much in a position where I'm like, well, I still have to earn a living somehow, but I'm on what I believe will be the path to potentially being able to earn a living as a writer at some point in the future. And so what I ended up doing in 2019, which is why I only published a novelette that year, was I ended up going back to the company that I had left and working there for a few more years in a less demanding capacity. So I went back and just worked as a kind of part-time pseudo, engineering role where I was kind of doing some very particular tasks that I thought wouldn't be too demanding on my vision, that allowed me to keep earning some money while I was proceeding along my path as a writer. And so I was actually had been back there for a year before the pandemic hit, where I was basically working two jobs. I was full time trying to advance myself as a writer, but also basically 35, 40 hours a week working for this education technology company. And I did that for a few years, basically from 2019 to 2021. So through the pandemic, and then basically got to the point where it was just becoming too taxing on me visually to keep doing both. And I had gotten far enough along as a writer that I felt comfortable kind of double, tripling down on all of that stuff, and ended up leaving again to focus exclusively on being a writer back in 2021. That's what I've been doing ever since. But obviously, I published a novel length book every year since 2017, with the exception of 2019. So basically, I'm up to the 7 books that I have from the Nodwell's timelines, plus 8, which is coming out in a couple of months. And then obviously, I have a couple more projects in the pipeline that'll be coming out later. But to your point, when you were talking about where you are with your stuff, I kind of feel like I've reached a point as an author and publisher where I'm less concerned necessarily about publishing new things and more concerned with making people more aware of the things that I've already published. Because I do have that body of work now. And the thing that I've kind of realized, especially in the past year or so, is that I've had a degree of success with some of my releases. Some of my books have actually proven to be quite popular and done quite well for me over the past several years. But I think there's a lot more potential in those books to reach a much wider reader base and appeal than they have attained thus far. And that's actually kind of one of my big focuses at this point, is to get everything to a point where it's as marketable and polished and presentable as possible, and really push and encourage people to partake in those things. Not to say that I'm necessarily winding down as an author and a publisher, because I still have plenty of other things that I want to do moving forward, but I don't necessarily feel that rush to publish or that drive to publish in the way that I did in those first several years. It's kind of become more of a thing where it's more about sustainability and about building sort of a legacy for my work, and kind of broadening the base of people that get to experience my work as a writer, and less about just like cranking out, book here, book there, everywhere, all the time, right? That's kind of the shift in my mindset over the past year or so. And I really think that's a good place for me to be in, because I've always been more of a quality over quantity sort of writer. And hearing you talk about sort of stressing out over Cutter's Deep coming out and Candy Witch coming out, that really resonates with me, because that's one thing I think about a lot as I lead up to new releases these days, is the whole idea of like, well, these previous books did really well, or people really liked these previous books. How are they going to feel about this new book, right? How does what I'm doing now compare to what I did previously? Because that's one thing I think about my work that I feel pretty confident in saying, is that I don't think I've ever really published any duds. I've never put anything out there that I think was anywhere close to being bad, right? And so at a certain point, when you've got 6, 7, 8 books out there, you start thinking, okay, if these are all good, what do I really need to be focusing on to improve my standing in the literary or the publishing world? Should I really be all that concerned with putting out more material, or should I be more focused on making more people aware of the material that's already out there and getting them to engage with that more? Like I say, that's kind of my mindset these days, but I'm fairly confident that I'm going to continue to publish, but I think the speed and the rate with which I write and publish things is definitely going to slow down here over the next few years, almost certainly.
When's the part of your story come where you met me and your life just became so much better? Is that coming up?
I think that's how we wrap this up, right?
Oh,
Because,
yeah.
what was it? Early 2022, the year after I'd kind of gone full time as a writer, was when I started looking to, honestly, just be totally honest with people. That's where this show came from. It was me sitting there thinking about what are things that I can do to broaden the reach of my work as an author. So I started thinking about, could I partner with another author? Could I find somebody who I would want to do something like this with, to build something like this show up from the ground and make it into a platform for us to talk about our work? And the rest is kind of history. I emailed you in your little website email form and was like, hey, there, Mr. McGilvray, would you like to do a podcast with me, sir?
It's funny. I didn't know at the time, well, I didn't know much about podcasts, but I didn't know as sort of like what it would become, all the stuff we would do.
Mm-hmm.
Not even crossed my mind. It was just like an experiment, trying different things, doing all sorts of crazy, wacky, entertaining things.
Yeah.
I look back fondly on it though. Episode 30.
Yeah. I mean, we've done so much crazy stuff over these past 2.5+ years now, doing this thing, that it is kind of wild. I always think it's wild to stop and think about it, but I'm of a very similar mind. I always say this, I'm always very proud of what we've managed to accomplish with this thing. I think it's really something kind of unique and special that I really don't see being duplicated anytime soon by anybody. So that's
Like the Carol Burnett show of
yeah,
podcasts.
yeah,
And now will be more educational.
nice, nice. Well, I think that's an excellent way to kind of wrap things up for this episode, because we definitely covered a lot in this first topic. I knew that would be the case though, so that's not surprising. Don't worry though, we'll probably try to be a little bit more focused and a little bit more succinct with our future writer's life topics, but obviously we had a lot to get through for this first one, so this one might be a little bit longer than some of the future ones. However, having said all of that, are there any other closing thoughts that you'd like to bring up before we get on out of here?
Few things. One is, well, now that you basically know all about us,
Mm-hmm.
we've got that out. Upcoming episodes, we'll be talking about other trials and tribulations that writers will face.
Mm-hmm.
Always looking for ideas. If there's certain things, if you're a writer or a reader, you have a question or there is something that you'd want us to discuss. I mean, we already have piles of ideas because we have our own, but
Yeah.
it's always interesting to hear from viewers if there's something that you'd like discussed on it. We'd love to hear from you. But my last final thoughts. Are you looking for a good read? Here's some recent reads that I will recommend to you. Just over the last month or two, went through a tear of books, actually. So if you're looking for some good reads, check these out. Below Economic Thresholds by Adam Hulse. Great read.
Banger.
Lure by Tim McGregor. Another great read. Fine Canadian writer as well. A Séance for Wicked King Death by Coy Hall, who we actually spoke about earlier.
Mm-hmm.
The Bale by Priscilla, Bettis. And Mastodon by Steve Stred. Another fine Canadian writer doing my
Nice.
Canadian content. And that's it. Just wanted you to know you should be checking those writers out. Those books, because I just finished them, and they're all great reads.
Nice.
So we look forward to seeing you guys next COVID.
Whoa. I think we can come up with a better reason to get together than another pandemic.
Well, we need another big catalyst.
Yeah. We'll work on that.
Okay.
But
well, we'll see you next month then.
yeah. In the meantime, if you want to know what I've been reading lately, you can join us for our next Off the Clock episode, which will be appearing on your feed later this month. And I will reveal that to you then. In the meantime, we will see you later.
See ya.
Congratulations. You just survived the Post-Mortem Report. For more information about the show, the hosts, or the things they talked about, visit our official website at postmortemreport.com. And always remember, good posts never die.